it's time now to move to the next part of the programme, which is a bit of a more in a personal development space. I suppose it builds a little bit on what Felicity was talking about. What are the ways that we can have impact? You've all had impact, massive impact all through the year. But what are those ways in which we can maximise it with different audiences? So we're pleased to welcome Nicky Moran from Ginger Training, who's going to lead us through some work around how can we have more personal impact. So over to you, Nicky.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Nicky. So hello, everybody. It's really, really exciting to be here. And my role at Ginger, can I just see, am I coming across okay? Because I'm seeing my picture and it's frozen at the moment. Is it coming across okay, Nicky?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay,
carry on.
So really good to be here. So just before I go into the content of today, I just want to set the context a little bit. So here we are at a conference, and normally at a conference, if I was there, what I'd be doing to make sure I had good impact on stage would I'd probably be coming and chatting to some of you beforehand and finding out a little bit more about you and just getting a sense of the atmosphere and really building rapport with people, because really to have good communication impact, the best way is to do that by connecting and getting to know people. So by the time I got on stage, I already know a few of you, and on stage I'd probably be looking into your eyes, reading your body language, and a lot of that would be how I would create impact, because I'm building rapport by connecting with you through the energy in the room. And so, of course, in this new world, it's so much more challenging, isn't it? I'm sure that you've experienced this weird situation that we're now getting used to, but it still feels really strange, that a lot of our communication is looking at our computers. And at the moment, all I can see is myself. So in fact, I'm talking to myself at the moment, and it can feel really strange. So I'll be looking a lot about communication impact, particularly in this new world, because let's face it, this is probably going to continue because it's really convenient. And my background, just to let you know, is I come from a background, I used to be in the theatre. So my training was theatre, I'm a singer, and then I went into PR, and I used to do a lot of work where I used to have to speak on camera to TV and radio. And what I'm realizing is in this new world, a lot of the skills I learned to become to speak to journalists on TV and radio, I'm having to resort to them now. So I'll be referring to them a lot during the next few minutes. So please feel free to connect to ask questions, but there will be more space at the end where I can answer any personal questions that you have. All right, so I hope you enjoy it. So let's get the slides up, please. Here we go. So today I'll be looking at 5 top tips for communication impact. As I say, with an emphasis on online, but actually it really relates to any impact. So just a little bit about us before we get going. So we are Ginger Leadership Communications, and our mission is inspiring human brilliance. And I know that's a big statement, but what we really love doing here at Ginger is really helping people to do communications. So everything about leadership and their voice. So whether you are a leader or not, actually you are a leader when you are communicating. So our style is about being courageous, also being really authentic, generosity and spice. So if I can make a few suggestions. In the online world, one of the things I find is it's really easy to get distracted. So I can't see you, I'm not in the room with you. So I'm going to ask you if you would do some of these things. And one of them is to not get distracted by other things. So I ask you if you could turn off devices, don't multitask in the next few minutes, because I feel you'll get a lot more out of the session. And the next thing is interact. Please feel free to comment. Please feel free to ask questions. And I'm going to try and make it so that we actually make it experiential as well. I'll do a couple of exercises. So as I said, questions and comments, you can put that in the chat, and I can't actually see the chat, but Nicky will let me know if there's any comments coming through. Yeah, and so take notes on your own personal action items and take a screenshot for any key slides. So the first thing I want to talk about is that in this new world where we're having to communicate, we're wanting to make impact, is that in this new world, it's a bit more strange because we can't see each other as easily. We don't have that easy rapport. And my first tip is to get used to this, to get used to feeling those nerves. And one of the things I learned when I was in my theatre training all those years ago is that nerves are actually really natural and they're not a bad thing. Actually, nerves can be a fuel for help bring your energy out when you're communicating with others. If we get nervous about the nerves, actually, it makes them worse. And the other thing to say about nerves is often when we're feeling nervous, we often think we're the only one. But actually, according to research, about 70% of people feel quite uncomfortable and nervous in communication situations. It's really normal. And we're going to look now at why that is and some ways that we can counteract some of those nerves. So first of all, we're going to talk about the brain a little bit. So the reason we get so nervous, especially when we're doing some public speaking or we have to go into a meeting, is that our brains are wired from the days where we, as our ancestors, had to fight for survival. So we actually have brains that were developed in days where life was really scary. So it meant that most of our days we were having to defend ourselves from dangerous animals. So our wiring on our brain developed so that we became very, very vigilant and we're always looking out for danger. And the problem is in current times, when we have to do something like presenting or go into new situations, we're dealing with the old reactions from our primitive brains. Now, to keep safety in those days, we would pack together in our tribes and stay safe. And of course, when we're standing up in front of people, our reaction might be that we feel like we have to run because we feel when we stand up on stage, we get the old adrenaline or the fight, flight or freeze reaction that we just want to run rather than stand up on stage and be scrutinized. Because in in ancient times, if we left the tribe, there was a very high chance that it would be dangerous for us. So the fear reaction that we get today when we're doing public speaking or going to a meeting is literally just old wiring. But if you think about how it affects our communication, it might be that we go into fight mode, and fighting might mean that we try a little bit harder, or we're a bit more controlling, or we sound a bit defended rather than relaxed. So that might be one way we go into. Or we might go into flight mode where we get a bit anxious and our body feels a bit tense and we sort of start speaking very, very, very quickly. And again, that affects our impact. Or we might go into freeze mode, and that means we just can't think clearly because of that ancient wiring in our brain. Makes it really hard for us to use the newer part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, where of course we think creatively and we are able to access information, and we actually can't access that when we go into our fear reaction. So what's the solution? Well, really the solution is to get noticing what's going on by doing something called awareness. So awareness is literally pausing rather than going straight into the fear reaction. So if we know, okay, I'm going up to speak, this is going to be, a new situation. If we go into our awareness and we pause, then instead of going into the fear reaction, we can do something intentional. And we have a little, somebody sitting there meditating, and actually that's a pretty good response. Just before I was doing my presentation today, I was sitting here doing some slow breathing. So actually preparing yourself beforehand, doing things like breathing, slowing down, can really help you for those first few seconds. So awareness and getting comfortable and aware that, oh, I might go into a fight response, let's just slow down, take some breaths, can really help you when you're entering the room. All right, so that's my first tip, having a chance to be aware. And the next thing is actually choosing your impact. It's actually making a good choice. So that's about, how do you choose to enter into that meeting? Oh, here we are. There I am, here in the meeting. I am looking a bit, my hair is all over the place, but actually I'm choosing to show my expression and positivity. But has anyone ever gone into a meeting and actually just had their name up? Rather than showing your face, you just have your name. So it's just your name and nothing else. Has anyone experienced either doing that or having somebody do that in the room? So one of the things I'm noticing these days is many people are choosing not to show their face. They're actually choosing just to sort of put their name up. And what impact does that have when you don't actually visibly show who you are? So the impact is that it's convenient because, you know, maybe you're going to be multitasking or doing your dishes or doing something else. But the impact is that you're actually not showing up in the room. So perhaps you are in the room and your face isn't there, and it has a really detrimental impact on the person actually leading the meeting. So what I really encourage all of you to do is just choose to be present and actually show your video, show your face. So ta-da, here I am. This is this is me choosing my impact. It might be that you don't have a great hair day, or you might not be feeling so great that day, but actually by choosing to be there, by putting your video on, it has a really powerful impact on the energy of the meeting. And it has a really powerful impact on the person leading the meeting as well. And this is incredibly important for you to have the impact that's really going to make a difference. So I would say really choose to be present, to put your video on and bring your full self. And I know some of the barriers are in the way with doing this. Maybe you're overwhelmed with going on to different meetings all the time. Maybe it's really difficult for you to you know, really be present at all these meetings. So I would say, you know, just think about the difference it makes when you do arrive and you are present and you bring your full self. And it's about, for me, choosing to bring your energy to the room. So one of the tips I have whenever I'm going into an online meeting is I just think, oh, I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody, or I choose an attitude that can really help me feel connected to my colleagues. All right, so really choose your impact. So the next thing I want to talk about is actually body language. And I'm going to skip the next slide because I think I'm going to go back to that in a minute. So we talked about choosing your impact, and that is about full body language. And body language is the first thing that people will see when you are entering a meeting, whether it's online or offline. So body language really matters. Within the first few seconds of your communication, your body language is speaking volumes about your status, your authority, how you feel that day. It really makes a difference. So in terms of body language, what are the things that make a difference online? Okay, well, let's look at this image. Here is a journalist who was recently being interviewed, and he did a whole interview basically looking downwards. He didn't look at the camera at all. So I know that it can be really difficult to engage with people online with eye contact, but one of the things that makes the biggest difference is eye contact. So if I can come out of the screen a minute, if we can take the presentation down a second. So let's just look at the impact of doing that. If I'm communicating to all of you today, and sometimes the camera might be down there or I'm looking down there, how do you feel when I'm communicating? How do you feel towards me when I'm doing that? And what's the difference when I look at the camera? Now, for me, as the person communicating, I am looking at a green dot right now. It is rather odd. But the difference it makes when you connect with the camera, even if you might be speaking to a lot of people, the person receiving it will be thinking that you're looking at them. So one of the most important things is eye contact. When we don't feel that somebody is looking at us, it has a really impactful response on the body. So if you're trying to make impact in any audience, really use your eye contact skillfully. So on a video format, it will be looking at the camera and trying to convey a warm connection with your eye contact. So that's about a subtle, warm, connective gaze. So if you find that daunting, one of my tips would be try and think about talking to a really good friend. So just beforehand, if you think, oh, somebody you really care about, and then bring that into your connection, that can actually make the experience much more warming for you, and it will relax and make your body language much softer. Okay, so eye contact is key. If you're in a room with people, what I would be saying is make sure you engage everybody in the room. So you want to be making sure that you look at the back of the auditorium, look at all the people in the room in a connective way so that they feel there's an emotional connection towards you, and that builds trust. That really builds trust. Okay, so that's eye contact, which is probably more important than ever, and it's something that humanizes this online connection. Okay, the next part is about body language. So if we can have the PowerPoint slide up again, please. You might see somebody that you recognize. So anybody recognize this lady? It's Theresa May. So she wasn't known for instilling a lot of confidence. And what we see here at Ginger is the problem for Theresa May is she a lot of the time undermined her impact because of the body language that she displayed. So, you know, some of these pictures here, she's doing big gestures, but there are other ones where she looks visibly stressed in her body. She looks physically anxious because she's quite stiff. And in this picture right on the bottom left, she's actually making herself small. And this is a really detrimental thing for your impact. So if I could take the slide away again, and I will visibly give you some tips really on body language. So one of the things on screen is you want to make sure that you're taking up enough space on the screen. So sometimes when we're sitting at home, what happens if we're in a conference or we're watching things, we start to make ourselves smaller and our spine collapses. And when that happens, that also makes our breathing go shallow, and we start feeling more nervous because we're not sitting well enough for our breath to help oxygenate our blood. So all of you, if I can ask you all to sit right up. So I want you all to take up your full spine and sit up fully to your full height. And I want you to ground your feet on the floor. So what this will do is it will help you to feel much more in your body. So what often happens when we get a bit nervous, we go into our heads and we start rushing, or we start thinking like random thoughts, and actually by slowing your breathing down, coming into your body and taking up your full height, and take some deep breaths. It will improve not only visually how you come across because you take up more space, it will improve how you feel. So it will help you slow down. So what we want is grounded feet, taking up space, and really good posture and great eye contact. Okay, so they're my tips for body language, and you'll look better and you'll feel better as well, because doing all of those things helps manage the nervous system and the fight or flight response. So let's have the slides back again. There's a couple more tips. Goodbye, Theresa May. Okay, so 2 more tips now. One is clarity is king. So having worked with many people on online communications, and communication generally is online, you have to be a lot more direct and clear with your communication. Often I see people coming online and talking around what they want to talk about in the meeting. And what we really recommend to people is get to the point more clearly and be a bit more directive, a bit like what I did at the beginning of our session today. So think about this before you go into your meeting, and imagine it's a bit like crossing a river. Communications is like crossing a river. So I want you to think about, first of all, what the starting point is for your audience. And what I mean by that is, like, why are we here? Is there a problem that we're solving? Is there something that we need to achieve in this meeting? And then think about what are the steps that are going to help us get to where we want to go to. So think about, why are we here? What are we actually trying to achieve from this meeting? What are the outcomes? And what are the steps to get us here? So actually just taking a few moments to get really clear on that. And then when you go into that meeting, if you're running it, communicating that clearly, and also informing people what you expect from them as well. And that really makes your impact much more crisp, much more clear. And I can tell you, a lot of people don't do that, and it will make a huge difference. So that's content and preparing well. My last tip is more about how you feel about going into the meetings. The best communicators act in service. Now, I want to share a little story. When I first became a leadership trainer, I was always worried about what people thought of me. And I remember the first job I ever did, I had to go and teach leadership in a bank, and I was terrified. And I put on a suit and I went in there, and I was petrified that people were going to think I didn't know what I was doing. I was so worried, and I needed to feel like I was going to impress them, and I wanted them to think I was great. And that created so much anxiety in my communication. It meant that I became defended, a bit cold and not so expressive, because I was fixated on how I was coming across. So what I found is that instead of focusing on how you want to come across in your impact, the most powerful thing is to focus on your audience and to focus on what are their needs. What do they really, really need from this communication? And that puts you in touch with problems that your audience might have, emotions, fears, and it can help your ability to communicate with impact be refined to thinking about how you can help them. And in my experience of doing this work for about 20 years, I think in many ways this makes the biggest impact of all. So focusing on offering them value rather than worrying about how you're coming across. And that creates a much more connective, much more powerful communication. And it stops you from being self-conscious, which gets rid of some of those nerves that I talked about right at the beginning. Okay, so they're my 5 tips. And there's plenty more here we could teach at Ginger. But let's just summarize then. So the first thing, remember the fight or flight syndrome, have awareness, and remember nerves are just normal. They're just a normal thing. And then choose to take charge of your impact. Choose to put your video on, choose to really be present. By you being present in the meeting, you get to influence how that meeting goes. So choose to take charge and bring your full self there. Then be aware of your body language. How are you communicating, notice what's happening in your body language, and make sure you use your body language in a way that's going to display that you feel comfortable and confident. Remember, the eye contact is really important, even though it feels counterintuitive to look at a green dot. And clarity is king. Make sure you prepare clearly before you go into that meeting. And the final one, the best communicators act in service. So that's all I've got for you. And what I'd love to do now is just take a few minutes to see if there are any questions to communicating. So I'll just hand over to Nicky now.
Lovely. Right, I'm looking at the green dot.
Are you? Good.
I am. But I want to say that the problem now I've got is that I can't see your reaction. So I don't know how to look at the green dot, and a little bit down to you.
So that's a brilliant question. So what I would say is you just want to go in between, because we are talking to each other, and by me seeing your face, yeah, I can respond to your reaction, and that will create warmth in my face. So I guess the green dot is when you need to present to a lot of people, but at the moment it actually our expression is coming out because we're looking at each other.
Yeah, okay, because I'm struggling now. I feel really weird looking at the green dot. And I think everybody else is thinking, oh my goodness, green dot. And I guess, you know, I've got my green dot on the top of my monitor, and so the position of the camera, you know, having a little play with where it is if you've got a separate you know, webcam is useful to just get some feedback from people about where that connection you know, is best made. Right, so I don't know whether you've got advice.
People have it on another camera, so they're looking off screen. So I think if you're at least your facial expression is up. I'm not suggesting you stare at the green dot the whole way through, because that would be odd. But just every now and again, if you want to make a clear point, if you're presenting something, people will feel that you're looking at them, and it has a more powerful impact.
Okay, good. Right, you'll see me practicing now through the rest of the day. Looking at the green dot. Okay, so I challenge everybody to be looking at their green dots now from now on in meetings. So we'll be tracking that. A couple of questions coming through. Kerry Battles made a really good point, and we've had a bit of a conversation about this in relation to presenting at conferences. But we rely so much on feedback from people.
Exactly.
You know, when and you mentioned this, you know, in a normal conference, you'd be on stage, you're getting a sense of people's sort of reactions. And so actually, Kerry was pointing out that she struggles on the laptop to control the nerves, that otherwise that initial feedback from the audience would reduce. So how can we manage our nerves a bit in an online setting?
That's a great question. So I talked about Theresa May and her stiff body. So one of the ways to help with that is to warm your body up, first of all, because when we're on a laptop, we don't move around so much, and we become stiff. So I suggest before you go onto the meeting, just do some shoulder rolls, do some whatever you need to do just to get your body ready. And then do the grounding that I talked about. So putting your feet on the ground, make sure your position, if your posture is good, it means you're more likely to breathe well. If your posture is collapsed, it means that your breathing is likely to be a little bit more shallow. So that's why I'm suggesting the posture, and actually doing some deep breaths. So breathing in slowly, holding your breath and breathing out slowly. That will actually manage the likelihood of your nervous system cranking up. So that's one thing. The other thing is I would suggest you try and make it as interactive as possible. So if you actually say, okay, please put in the chat, how are you today? I wasn't able to do that today, but that is definitely something I would normally do. I would try and make it interactive, but we agreed that it wasn't so easy today to be able to do that. But if it's a smaller meeting, the first thing I would do is, where are you today? How are you today? Let me know what you are wanting from this meeting. So I might be just having a chat and a check-in, and it's not as good as if you're in the room, but it at least feels more of a conversation.
Yeah, and people are saying that thinking that they're talking to a friend is helpful, and you know, I feel like I'm a bit on the radio here with no audience. It's very odd, and I guess, you know, that's sort of easier for me because I'm not looking at 200 people in a room. So, you know, it feels more intimate somehow. And
it's true, because people will only be listening to it on their own as well. So
yeah.
there is an advantage there, isn't it? If you have 200 people staring at you, that also can trigger the fight or flight response. But if you're thinking, I'm only talking to one person, because that's how they're receiving you, then it can feel more intimate.
Yeah. And so somebody's asked a question about how do we encourage people to turn their camera on? So I've really noticed in the last year that, you know, I'm on calls all the time where everyone's got the camera on, so it's not been an issue. But I sometimes join a meeting where the culture has become people don't turn their cameras on. So how can we encourage people to do that?
I think framing it positively. So instead of making people wrong and saying, come on, turn your cameras on, this isn't fair, saying it's so nice to see people's faces. And it really makes the experience of communicating so much better for me. So I'd really appreciate it if you would turn your camera on so I can see your faces. That would be great. So I would just encouraging people, and the benefits of doing that for you.
Lovely. And what about backgrounds? Tell us a bit about using backgrounds, nice backgrounds of beaches that we really want to be on, or, you know, or just the background of our house. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, you want to make sure your background isn't too distracting. So if you've got a lot of clutter in the background, people are going to be sort of looking around the background rather than looking at you. If you can, I mean, I've got sort of my files, or if you can have your background reflecting who you are, that's nice, or a plant, or something that looks homely and inviting. But I think we're all at home, so I think there is something okay about showing a bit of who you are in your background as well, because it makes the experience more human to human.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much. We could carry on all day looking at our green dots, but I'm going to challenge the next speakers to be looking at their green dots too, and everyone now I'm in a meeting with. So thank you so much, Nicky. There's lots of comments in the chat at how useful and informative a session it's been, and
thank you.
And I wish we had you longer today.